Howdy, folks. This is Dr. Matt Grieshop, Director of the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and you're joining us for Organic Chat. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Organic Chat. Today's guest is Amanda Felder. She's the Organic Compliance Specialist at Earthbound Farms, and she's also a member of the National Organic Standards Board. Welcome aboard, Amanda.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So this is just a nice little conversation about organic ag. I know you've been in the industry quite a long time. Maybe we could start there. So how long have you been working in organics?
Yeah, so I started in 2011. Earthbound Farm has a little farm stand, so it's a 9-acre working farm and a grocery store and certified organic kitchen cafe. So I started working as just the manager. Organic compliance just got thrown at me, and I learned from scratch, and my certifier was a big help, and then moved into corporate compliance, and then once Earthbound got acquired by Taylor Farms, took over our massive all of our facility management across North America, and farming and processing, handling and brokerage. So I've learned a lot over the years and evolved from our tiny little farm stand to North American compliance.
And when you say North American, that includes multiple countries, correct?
United States, Canada, and Mexico. And each country has their own organic standard. So there's the organic what I would call the organic law or regulation in the U.S., and then Mexico has their own differences. And so to sell between countries, you have to meet both compliance pieces. So different standards, same goal.
Right. So what are, if you don't mind me asking, what are some of the key differences between the three standards? So National Organic Program here via the USDA, and then the Canadian standard and the Mexican standard.
Yeah, so there's equivalencies between U.S. and Canada. So what that means is that to sell in Canada, if you are USDA certified organic, they will accept your products for sale without having to be Canadian Organic Regime or CORE certified.
Okay.
So long as you are not hydroponic or aeroponic.
Okay.
You do not use Chilean nitrate in your soil, which is a type of fertilizer. And the livestock requirements are stricter, where they require more acreage per animal than we do in the U.S. So if you meet those, they will take a USDA organic product as is, and you don't have to be dual certified.
Okay.
There is no compliance or equivalency, thank you,
no worries,
between Mexico and U.S. So to sell into Mexico, we have to be both LPO, which is Ley del Organico Program, something, yes, terrible Spanish, sorry, something, and then also USDA, and vice versa. Our facilities and our farms in Mexico have to be certified to both arrangements. So from a facility standpoint, it's pretty much the same requirements. There are different materials on what we call the national list for U.S. that are allowed that aren't allowed in Mexico. For example, glycerin is allowed to be used in the U.S. It's on 205-606 as it can be used. Non-organic glycerin can be used so long as we can't find or we can prove commercial availability doesn't exist.
So it's kind of like organic. The seed rules.
Yes.
All right.
But that's not allowed whatsoever, even if it's organic glycerin, as like a processing aid in ingredients in Mexico. So it's a little different. And then, but for farming, they have a little bit higher standards. We don't actually farm in Mexico. We have partners, so I'm not as versed in that field. But they don't allow Chilean nitrate, which we do in the U.S. Canada and Mexico both don't allow that. So here in the U.S., most of our farms don't use that because it's hard to distinguish in the field what's going to go to what country at any given day. And even if you plan it perfectly, Mother Nature likes to change. And surprise, we have to change our growing plans. So if we get a crazy rain, the soil's, something's off, then we have to shift whatever we already had planned. So we can map it out perfectly, but no matter what, it's best if it's compliant across all.
Just to simplify things so you don't get yourself in a pickle.
Yeah, so I'd say the U.S. standard is, it it's pretty equivalent across other countries' requirements. Canada has stricter chlorine requirements. So in the U.S., we can use chlorine to wash our produce as long as it follows what's at this time 4 parts per million or less. It has to meet Safe Drinking Water Act levels. So it just has to have a rinse. So you can wash it in 10 parts per million. It needs to be rinsed in 4 parts or less. In Canada, it has to be at what their safe drinking water limit would be for that province the entire time. So we operate in Toronto, which is in Ontario, and their limits are 4 ppm. So we can't have anything higher than 4 ppm chlorine in contact with any organic product whatsoever, or it doesn't become organic anymore.
So is that something you standardize, or is that something that you mix up between the different economies?
We had to mix between the 2 countries because for food safety, we know we want a higher limit. There is no kill step for produce, so it's really important. We actually petitioned the Canadian Standards Board, so it's not as small as NOSB. So here in the U.S., we petition the National Organic Standards Board, 15 people vote. In Canada, it's like 75 people, and they're like scientific-y people. So they're very behind closed doors. It's not as public forum as the U.S. is, and they evaluate whatever people have petitioned, whatever materials are on the list, and they make their adjustments. And so I don't remember if that's on a 5-year sunsetty type thing like we do in the U.S. But they have a website where the Canadian rule is also really confusing, where in the U.S. it's just
organic regulations confusing? Come on.
In the U.S. it's 7 CFR 200. It's really not hard. In Canada, it's Safe Food for Canadians Act. Then there's the Canadian Organic something or other, and there's like 3 or 4 things to reference. So when I'm looking up Y requirements, it's pulling this up and then pulling up this rule, and citing it is a whole other beast. I've done IOIA, which is International Organic Inspectors Association training. Basically it trains inspectors, and they just beat the regulation into your head over the course of a week of intensive training, so that you can audit.
Where's that held?
Places. They have virtual trainings, which I don't recommend for your first training. For multiple scopes, yes, but your first, it's so valuable to be in person because you're staying somewhere for a week. It's 5 days. In those lunch times, evening times, you're talking to other people in your course of their experience. You get that off time with your professor or teacher. And some of those people in your class are already inspectors. So you can ask them, hey, how are you billing? How does it work? Like, what's the actual practical? And you don't get that virtually. And so it rotates. So IOA offers it different parts of the country. So I did my processor training in Utah. And so I learned all about grain, which is not anything that I do. So it was great for me because it was a totally different scope than I'm used to. And then my producer grower training was in Petaluma. So it was closer for me for home. And then my Canadian training I did virtually, which was nice because I didn't have to travel. And I already had experience at a facility, so I kind of already knew things. But seeing it in practice and actually applying the standard to something practical makes a huge difference to Connect. So if an operation that's certified can afford to do IOA training, I highly suggest it. I'd say all in, it's about $5,000 to be an inspector. That's including travel. So if you don't have to do travel, it's less. And they do have webinars, I think they're like $300, that you can at least just learn the standard. And so the standard is so complicated that they really break it down and apply real world examples, and you can ask how it applies to your operation. But it's just so much more helpful. I took that class 5 years after I had already been doing organic certification as an inspectee. And the whole time I was like, oh, that's why we have that dumb form. Oh, that's why that process is that way. And not that I question why do we do things, but I like to know why do we do things. Of course. And so it made more sense as to, that explains, because maybe an inspector has never asked that before, because maybe I've had easier inspectors or lazy inspectors, or it wasn't anything that was high risk, but it just made more sense why things are the way they are. And so I like to connect how things are done and why, or make things more efficient. And so to take the regulation and apply it, it made so much more sense than me just trying to hustle through. And it makes me a better person going forward of making and getting facilities certified and filling out OSPs to know what is the actual ask, because this verbiage doesn't make sense. And it's almost a foreign language certification because it is legalese, and it's hard to break that down.
It's a legal standard. People
to
go to
something
jail.
That's practical. Yes. Trying to emphasize that to everyone. It's just not get a fix-it ticket. It is continuous improvement. But there is a risk of prison, and it's a federal law, so this is federal prison that is a risk.
It's not messing around. So OSP would be Organic Systems Plan?
Yes, sorry, there are a lot of acronyms.
Oh, that's all right. I always get those just for our listeners, so they're not, huh?
Yes, I appreciate it.
So can you tell me a little bit about what's a day in your professional life like?
That's a really loaded question. I always feel exhausted when I actually talk about what I do. So it changes every day. Normal maintenance is, label review for compliance. So anytime part of that regulation, there's several pages of, labels have to meet a certain requirement. So you can't, the organic logo has to be a certain color.
Right.
It can only be green and white and brown, or black and white. It can't be whatever people decide. So actually, it's a fun game in my family to go shopping at Costco and pick out all of the cartons that are wrong. And my son, he's 9, is doing a great job. So it's kind of fun to see who messes it up. And now it's a trademark violation. And now, it's copyright infringement. So there's a lot more penalties that go into that than used to be. So things like that, and claims and ingredient statements, and do they match our formulas when we have salads and dressings and toppings. So that I'm always making sure those are compliant before they get finalized, and then we send those to our certifier for approval. So I do a lot of organic system plan maintenance anytime we add a new product or a new supplier. I already know what the requirement is, so I'm internally vetting it, and then when it passes my test, I send it on to the certifier. The average person would just send it on to their certifier, get told what to fix, and then they go back and forth.
Right.
I get to skip those steps just from my experience.
So it sounds like having that inspector training is just incredibly valuable in your position, and really it probably saves your employer a lot of pain and suffering.
It saves a lot of time, and especially, I find most companies do organic certification of let me ask for forgiveness and not for permission. Sometimes with your certifier, and you just don't think, it's not graded like food safety. You don't get a score. So your customers aren't saying, oh, you had a not great inspection, you had a bunch of non-compliances, I should be worried about you. You're just certified, which sometimes I don't like. And so sometimes it takes a back burner to food safety, and when it comes to importance for some companies, and even just some people just don't have time. Like when I did my farm inspection for IOA, when we did mass balance, we were pulling napkins and Post-it notes out of a box for harvest records. That's practical. Not everyone has a fancy computer system.
Right.
But knowing, having that filter, because then you end up the risk of you're at an inspection and you planted something that you shouldn't have, or you applied something you shouldn't have because your friend told you it was organic. Or I don't know how many times I filtered to my coworkers over the years of, I was told this is allowed for organic. It says it's organic. Well, materials can't be certified organic. A chemical can't be. So when they say, when I go not grocery shopping, when I go to Home Depot and it's organic Miracle Grow, it's not organic. There is not there's no oversight from an input standpoint that way.
Right.
So as a consumer, you think you're buying something organic, and it's really not.
Right.
And does it meet claims? Maybe it does, but there's no, unless it's OMRI certified, which is Organic Material Reviews Institute, or a CDFA registration, or a whole bunch of other things. You don't know that. And so,
I didn't realize that on the fertilizers. I guess I kind of figured if you're going to say organic, you would probably have an OMRI stamp. But OMRI's non-governmental. It's voluntary. It's not. And
OMRI's not required. And sometimes I feel like sometimes OMRI's sometimes a waste because it's not required. And so it's just somebody else saying for you it met the organic standards. And so you could just go to your certifier and say, I'm using this fertilizer and get it blessed. You don't have to. But it's a quick verification without having to do that research.
Yes.
So if you're not a ask for permission person, that's helpful. However, maybe it's misbranded or it's not certified anymore, and now you've applied that, and from a farm, if you apply something that's
gosh.
prohibited, it's 3 years.
Right,
3
you're going
years,
through transition all over again.
Now you lose certification. Maybe you're lucky and it's only a small section of your farm. Maybe out of 100 acres, it's 1 acre that got planted funky. But maybe it's your whole operation, and now you're out of business for 3 years.
Yep.
So do you want to take the risk and lose that? Where a facility, they tend to be a little lazier because they could just re-sanitize everything,
Right.
dump whatever they just
Right.
processed, and move forward. It's still a loss, but they don't have the time constraint that farmers do.
Right.
So it's super critical for farmers, and I always push to my facilities, it's, even though you can reset, do you want, it's still a loss of time to reset,
Right.
and to dump and to lose.
Right.
And do you want to be that person who hits the red button and says stop the line? Because nobody wants that either. So even though it's not 3 years, that hour is still significant. And so
Absolutely.
Knowing what's allowed, or the process in just making things smoother for your certifier, makes it smoother for you long term. And so it's hard sometimes because when you don't know what the ask is or what the requirement is, we do too much. And I'm guilty of that. When, strengthening organic enforcement came out, SOE, we had to come up with fraud prevention plans.
Right.
And I already had that system in place. I just had to put it in writing. And because that was always our transparent process at Earthbound and Taylor was, verifying that what we were buying actually was legitimately organic and not just taking a piece of paper and checking a box. But putting that on paper is like a 20-page SOP.
Yep.
And so I really waited, and it was hard for me to not write a 20-page SOP to see what's the actual ask from certifiers, because I knew I would write something crazy. So how do I just put into the ask what's required and not go over the top? Because we all do that, and so we write out everything that we do. But if you write every single step, now you've pigeonholed yourself that is your process. And if something changes, now you have to change your OSP, or you face a non-compliance that you don't have a current OSP.
Right.
So how do you keep on top of those things but still be compliant? And that just takes time.
Yeah. That's one of the big challenges, I think, that folks in the organic industry face, and it's interesting to see how that plays out over different scales. So small operations versus large operations, because if you don't have the throughput to hire an Amanda Felder, then it's just you.
Yes. No, and it's hard. And even when I started at the farm stand, and we were part of Earthbound Farm, but we really were our own little island of our own operation of sorts. And I worked with our farmer and our chef of finding new supplies. And when I didn't know, I still am not good at material review. You need a scientific degree to understand chemicals. And I send it immediately to my certifier, and I'm like, I have questions. What do I need from you? How do I do this? Or even just this week, I emailed and said, hey, this is coming down the pipeline. I don't know how this impacts us. What do you need from me if I'm going to do this? So that so I could be prepared. And we treat our certifiers sometimes like they are kind of the police of sorts, but they're here to help you. And for the most part, and if you have a bad certifier, then go find a better one that has more customer service, because you're paying them for their service.
Right.
So I learned my first 5 years was just dumb questions to my certifier, which probably wasn't good looking back, but I grew up. I learned doing, asking for permission. So I asked a lot of questions. And so, my certifier now, when I meet with other people in the agency, and they'll say, how do you set this up, or how do you do this? And I was like, look, I was trained by your person. She taught me how to make her life easier. And so when I had questions, it was open-ended of, I can ask a dumb question of how does this impact this, or what change do I need to make? And then I don't have non-compliances. I don't like getting in trouble. I'm a very compliant person, so that helps for me. But having that dialogue with your certifier to know that you can ask questions and are they willing to answer you. Or I've worked with multiple certifiers, and I've had certifiers that say, oh, you should hire a consultant for that. And I'm like, I just had a question about how something is compliant. That's not a consultant question. You should know how this enforcement affects my business. And if you can't explain that to me, I'm really confused why
that's a real problem.
You can't help me with that.
That's a real problem. Yeah, for sure. I don't know. My interactions with most folks on the certification side, it's limited to just a few certifiers, but I suspect that most of them were happy to explain to you how to make their life easier.
You'd be surprised.
But not?
Some aren't. Some, because I'm like, look, this is my process. How do we make this better?
Right.
And some are, like, we've transitioned between certifiers at Taylor, and, it was like, look, this is how I worked with certifier A. How do we make that work with you?
Right.
And we have multiple facilities, so how do we make this more streamlined and simple? And having a dedicated rep, because we're big, helps. And so we built a good relationship of how do we make this more efficient so we're not reviewing the same thing 5 times and wasting your time, but also being compliant. And so I think I just have a weird brain that understands what needs to get done and how to work through it. And eventually we come to some negotiation of sorts. But I don't know, some certifiers, they only work in their box. And they won't go outside their box.
Maybe
so
I've just been
this
lucky.
is, yes, this is the way it works, and there is no exception. And we just do things inefficiently. And I've come to terms with that, and we switch certifiers.
Right.
So just some things aren't always efficient, and if you're not happy, it's fine. There's other options of certifier. You can shop around to other certifiers.
So you mentioned you've got a brain for this stuff. So I'm really curious. So you also mentioned you started out at Earthbound's farm stand, working for them. So what brought you to that? I mean, did you come from an agricultural background? Were you an avid gardener?
Yeah, no, I totally fell into
life,
this.
or
no,
how did it happen?
It's serendipity. So as I've looked back on my life and realized how I got to where I am, I'm a very compliant personality. So I was a resident advisor in college. I was a conflict manager in school. I was a camp counselor. Like, clearly, I'm a compliant person. So very rule-following oriented. My dad was a produce manager at Raley's, which is a grocery store in Northern California.
Yep.
Not related to what I do, ironically, but apparently it is. So I knew all of our local farmers growing up. My dad knew all the farmers. We'd go to their ranches and go pick stuff off the trees. They were all conventional, by the way. And so I did, looking back in high school, I wrote a paper about how bad pesticides are for the environment and DDT. That is where it ended. I never had a passion to I didn't know what organic was. It wasn't a thing. And then fast forward into college, I just worked in retail in life, and I started buying organic milk. That's how I got into the organic club. Most people buy organic dairy or produce. That's usually the precursor. Yep. My doctor had said, there's no organic hormones guaranteed in organic milk. This is a good life choice for you. Great. Then I worked retail, so I was never available for weekends or evenings. I missed lots of life happenings from my husband's work or family barbecues. And I just got burnt out, and I was like, find a new job. It's 2009, 2010. The economy was not great, and the farm stand was hiring for a new retail office manager.
Okay.
And I was like, great, I've got experience in that. It's an office job, so Monday through Friday, sounds normal. And then they handed me this giant binder and was like, here's your organic system plan, and you have inspections. Figure it out. The good news is it was a dedicated organic company, so there's beyond low risk of mucking anything up. And I got to know our founders, Drew and Myra Goodman, really well. Wow. They were at the farm stand. And so Myra became a mentor. I worked with Jana Joe as our farmer, so I really got thrown into what organic actually is. Gave tours every week to kids and local people on how organic farming works. So I give this spiel still to this day of how we started and what organic farming means. And it was just planted in my soul. And like I said, I have a knack for the compliance piece, and corporate saw, and the corporate organic director was like, hey, we've got an opening. I think you'd be really good at this. You've been handling inspections really well. And a corporate job sounded really good, so just slowly moved and, just found opportunities. And, I found opportunities for efficiencies. When Taylor acquired Earthbound, I went from having 2 operations to over 20. And so it, not all of them were certified at the time, but how do we make things efficient and globally? And I just, eventually my plate became really, really full. But it was just a little bit at a time, kind of like a frog boiling in a pot slowly.
Well, and it just got a lot fuller because you joined the NOSB this year.
Yes, so my pretend spare time.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, National Organic Standards Board.
Yes.
So what so far, what brought you to that, and so far, what are your big observations?
Yeah, so I don't know, I felt
Because it's got to be fascinating. I've been on the other side of the NOSB. I've never been on the NOSB side.
Yes,
so similar to
I've
your
been an
experience as
attendee.
certifiers.
Yeah, so I've been an attendee for 6 years now. Religiously, I've been to 2 meetings a year in person or virtually, and so it's fun to see the other side of how it actually works. But as an attendee, I see where it goes, and I've learn the value of regulations are changing. Whether you know about it or not, it's still changing, and you can have a voice or not. And so, Earthbound and Taylor both have provided public comment in written or oral at the NOSB meetings for sunset materials or petition materials of why these things are needed or aren't. And I just think the last few years, especially working with Taylor Farms, I've had such a massive growth of knowledge of handling what we call handling an organic, where it's a processing facility. So we wash and cut and dry produce and pack it into retail. We also have brokers and a distribution channel to make things more efficient across country for deliveries. So there's importing involved with that. We're also importing all of our products from our Mexican farms and facilities, so managing that piece as well. We also make our own salad dressings. So there's a whole lot now that outside of just what used to be salad and cut veg, that now is this huge spread of knowledge that I can bring to the board when we're looking at removing materials potentially from the national list. And is it relevant? And because sometimes people don't know that this exists. So we as a board, or the board before I was on it, would say, hey, no one's writing in, no one must use this, let's get rid of it. And it's like, no, the little guy is still using this. And just even last week was our first meeting for 2025, and we're talking about organic colors. Non-organic colors are currently allowed on 205-606 if organic colors are not available.
Okay. They
still have to be non-GMO, not irradiated, not grown with sewage sludge. And you have to prove you couldn't find an organic variety meeting your requirements. So it could be size, it could be the quality. So like we've tried to make our own colors at our cafe. So at Taylor as a whole, we don't use colors. But my little kitchen likes to make cupcakes for birthday parties.
Right.
And kids don't like white frosting. I'm sorry. I don't know who you are. My son hates it because I make him have white frosting all the time.
Yeah.
and we've made, red, which is really pink with beets, and it tastes earthy. No one wants an earthy tasting cupcake.
High iron content.
And it's really hard to make a color from scratch, and it's hard to not find a 5-gallon jug of organic colors. And so I challenged the community at the board, and I said, look, while it is commercially available and it exists, I'm Googling most organic candies and gummies all use organic juice now, organic colors. It's great. But the little guy who only needs a tiny bottle with 3 drops, does that exist? Because when I've reached out to those companies, they'll send me a sample, but they won't send me more than 1 sample. And they won't sell me samples. And I don't need 5 gallons. Because it's a waste.
It'd probably solve
and the cost isn't there. It'd be like a 10-year
issue for your great grandchildren.
Yes, and so and that's why commercial availability exists. So you aren't forced to buy a giant 1,000-pound box of something when you only need 2 scoops. So it's hard when someone says it's available, but is it always available? And that's a hard thing to define. And so I'm on the fence. I don't know if I'll hold it up. But I do think of the little guy because I was at the farm stand. So even though I'm part of a big agricultural company, and yes, I do represent that. My roots are still at this little farm. So I know how hard it is to find inputs for a 9-acre farm. They don't have the buying capabilities that a 10,000-acre operation has. They're completely different. Their challenges are significantly different, and they can't be compared the same way. So I think I bring that opinion where I feel like most producers on the board are either small farmers or big farmers, and maybe they don't have both. And I'm not even a farmer, but I have that with me. And so I feel like, I just feel like I brought something that was missing, or just a good value to all those material reviews, and then just understanding processes, working with multiple certifiers and having to negotiate efficiencies and what is sound and sensible for an operation. Whether you want me to, inspectors are always saying, you should do it this way. Okay, well, if I change it, then the next inspector wants me to do it a different way. So I'm never going to make the inspector happy. What makes the certifier happy? What actually meets regulation? And so while that might be your ideal thought as an inspector and as a human, that's not practical from a farm perspective. And I've had a lot of inspectors who aren't farm-based. I've had a lot of inspectors who aren't produce-based. So trying to explain the produce business to somebody who has no experience in produce is completely foreign to them. And so there's a lot of education of, our product is here for 24 hours, 48 tops. It's not sitting here for 6 months. It's not the same type of risk that you're thinking that it is.
Lettuce silo.
No, it's not hidden anywhere. What we have is what we have. Here, let me explain to you the life cycle of when it's cut. It's got like 17 days before it's dead at the finish line. And they don't get that. And so there's a lot of education sometimes. And I can't imagine a small farmer. Like, I think back to the times that I've struggled and had inspectors challenge me, and I'm like, I don't know why. This is just why we do it. I don't have a good explanation for you.
Yeah.
But what you're asking isn't realistic, or why should I be responsible for my supplier labeling something this way, or, trying to explain something that's outside of your control.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, 'cause so much is, especially in farming.
Yes, very much so.
So, back to the NOSB, I'm wondering, so you're still, you just got in there.
My day job.
Yeah, and you still have a day job, of course, but in your first interactions with the NOSB, on the other side of the table, what would you say are the 2 or 3 most surprising things that you've learned?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's necessarily surprising. I think, I've observed these people. So for me, they're like little celebrities in the organic world. So now I'm like, I know you, but I don't know you, and you don't know who I am. I've just been sitting on the other end staring at you for days, for years. And so it's fun to get to know them as people.
Cool.
You kind of build an opinion, listening to people's opinions, or when they do or don't participate of, you don't see what happens in subcommittee. And so some people are not vocal at all on the board. And so you're like, I don't know. Not them saying that they don't participate, but you just don't know where they stand on things. Or are they really, a perfectionist? Or are they realist? Or are they totally like, I just do organic because I have to, and I'm trying. Like, there's the idea that there's people who are just pushing organic for dollars and not for benefit, right? So where do you fall? And so getting to know those people outside of that to see where they're like really do thrive in that private conversation of breaking down scientific bits or not, or, just even what knowledge they have from something. I was really surprised. I actually just talked to somebody about this earlier today. We have a new member also, Andy from Sprouts, and I love her. She's my new best friend. We met at Expo West, as it's all been virtual for our National Organic Program since the government's in chaos stuff. And so we met at an organic conference and actually got to spend some time getting to know each other. So I actually know some new member besides just an email or some virtual chat. And so we really bonded, and she has so much handling experience. So, I thought, here's some retailer person coming out of random grocery store, like what background do you really have? And she, worked on a lot of product development. So she's actually petitioned a lot of these materials to the board in the past. So while she might not have a lot of NOSB past experience, like, she has done petitioning and she understands the actual usage of a lot of these materials. And so while we're reviewing technical reports and comments from the public, having that personal experience of, no, let me tell you why this is important matters, which is why I'm a huge advocate for in-person comments for the National Organic Standards Board meetings, because there's so much more passion that comes across in need and importance in being able to have that dialogue with the public of why something is needed. And, it still sticks with me as an attendee from 5-6 years ago when I think like 6 pineapple farmers came and presented back to back. And then the next year tobacco farmers came and presented about fatty alcohols. And that still stuck with me, and the need for that material and why, which is more valuable to me than just reading a technical report of how something is used or why. And maybe you have a weird nuance that doesn't get communicated in a technical report, and maybe you don't think to write that in a comment, but if we can ask you that question, then now you've provided that answer and it sinks in better. And you don't know that until it comes. And it's great to get public comment. I love pictures. Provide lots of pictures, please. As my favorite comments, because I don't know apples. I don't know grains. I don't, my experience is leafy greens and veggies. And granted, we do apple slices, but I don't know how apple farming works and pear farming. And, I attend events in industry to learn more in general, and I'm always excited to learn about new crops or what difficulties lie. But, if you can explain that to me, that's more valuable than just saying, hey, yes, please relist this, it's needed. What is your actual experience with it? Sold.
Most of the times I've been to NOSB, it's about apples.
There's a lot of apples. There's a lot of Northwest, especially the Portland meeting, but that made sense. And so, but I like that. I liked going to Wisconsin and, having more dairy farmers present. And, there's usually one or two that call in and a lot write in, but having that attendance, which is why the meeting moves around. It moves around to different parts of the country in fall and spring meetings to try to give physical access to people. And even if you don't get a slot to talk, you can still grab a member in the hallway and just have a conversation, or at the restaurant or at the bar, or, we're not limited, we're not going to discuss anything that's not public, but you can still give me your testimony, or I'm still going to phone a friend often and say, hey, Matt, what's your intake on compost and plastic polymers, because I'm so drowning in this, but I want to know, and I'm I take it serious that I'm representing an entire community. And while I have a lot of knowledge, it's not infinite. And there's only 2 handlers.
Right.
So that knowledge is really limited by 2 people. And there's only 4 producers. So that could be, right now we have a strawberry farmer. We have, a small farmer. We have Grimway Farms, and it's terrible. I don't remember who the other producer is.
You're still new.
But thanks.
Don't forget.
But we had Nate Powell-Palm, who also, raised livestock, and so that's a huge value. Cows are different from chicken, which are different from strawberries, which are different from tree fruit. So how do you cover all organic crops by 4 people? It's not possible.
Well, and then you get into the regional differences.
Yes.
I mean, one of my big privileges is having worked in, biological or organic production systems in the Mountain West, the Pacific Northwest, the Central Coast, the North Central region, and down in Kansas is, going back to apples, what I like to tell people is producing apples in Michigan may as well be a different crop than Washington, because the key limiting factors and the key opportunities are just completely different.
Yes.
It's all about irrigation in Washington, like most Western agriculture. And in Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, you have too much rain, frankly, and it's really mostly about pest management, because the fungal and insect pressures are just so incredibly
completely different. Yeah. I mean, even in our own county, say we farm in Monterey County, and Monterey County is huge. And I explain this to customers all the time. We have sandy soil, we have perfect, healthy, John Steinbeck soil, and then we've got clay soil, all within the same county. And that's within an hour drive of the same ranches, which is already just significant in that, let alone growing it in the desert.
Right, go to Imperial or Yuma. And
or growing greens in Nevada or anywhere else.
Leaching salt. Problem number 1.
Totally different issues.
Which, can be a problem anywhere, but not like it is down there.
No, so I'm a big proponent of having a big toolbox, because, and I, again, with the ask for permission and not for forgiveness, which everybody should be doing. It's hard when you have a pest problem out of control and you're like, I need to spray something. Let me send it to my certifier. And then they say, great, I'll get back to you in 4 weeks. I don't have 4 weeks. I need to get it approved now.
6 hours.
I am the queen of contingency plans, and I actually drive my teams angry because they're like, we don't do that. And I was like, never say never. And literally the next week they'll be like, so remember when I said we weren't going to do this? And I was like, we're doing it, aren't we? And they're like, we're totally doing it. I was like, I told you we were going to. Because in produce we move so quickly, and Mother Nature happens quickly. We think it's going to be 80 degrees today and it'll be 50 all of a sudden. You don't know, and you can only prepare so much. And so if you have a certifier, even the best certifier can take a couple of days to review something, or you pay through the nose and maybe you still get it done in a day or two. Like, you need to just know these are our options. Here's plan A, B, and C, and at least have those approved so you can move seamlessly.
So you can get ahead of the problem.
And not everyone knows that they can do that.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. So this has been an awesome conversation. I have one more question for you that kind of backtracks a little bit in our conversation. But what is organic to you? You mentioned, your experience at Earthbound at the farm stand and working with the grower there. So what is it to you? Obviously, there's a legal standard.
Yeah. No, so it's the gold standard. That's the answer. I don't know how to say this without being cheesy. It's everything. You know, consumers are looking for something that's good for the planet, something that's good for their body. I stepped into organic as a consumer because it was better for my body. And, I have a 9-year-old son. When I was pregnant, I then became the crazy organic lady more than I already was. And like, his birthday cake was organic. He only ate organic food. And I was like, I don't want to be that crazy mom that's like, you can't eat that cupcake at Joey's birthday party because it's not organic. So how do I calm down? And so I have a little more balance now.
Oh, that's
but like, we still eat at McDonald's, but we get the organic juice box. We try to at least eat organic at least 80%. 80-20 was what somebody told me is a good balance. So it's been my goal.
That's a good balance. Yeah.
But I know the health benefits. I had cancer 12 years ago now. I had thyroid cancer, which is the most curable cancer. So if you had to get cancer, that's the one you would want to pick.
Yeah.
And it really made me think more of what, it's not something that's in my family. So, what exposures did I have? Is it, not to be cheesy, going into the farms and eating stuff off of the tree that probably were not just sprayed yesterday, but I'm pretty sure that probably had something to do with it. Environmental exposures that we have. All those things contribute to our health that we don't think about.
Yes.
And, that is the number one for me. Also, I want to have a better planet for my kid. We have a 5-acre ranch-ish land. We don't really do a whole lot with it because it's a lot of effort.
It is a lot of effort, isn't it?
So hard to farm. And I hate ground squirrels and birds, and they're terrible, and I don't like bugs, and I can't
nothing
spray
like
anything.
farming to turn you into a cold-blooded killer.
It's terrible.
It is really horrible.
Yeah. And so my husband just bought blueberries, and I was like, why? Birds are going to eat them. I don't even know why you bothered this year. It's just going to get eaten. But I'm so pessimistic. Sorry.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard to not just be like, just spray it and kill everything. But I don't want that. I don't want to eat it. I don't want my son to play in our field and then run through a bunch of chemicals, because I did that as a kid. You hear those stories of people following the DDT trucks and getting sprayed.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's a thing. And we don't know what that impact is 10, 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And so, from an environmental standpoint, it's the only thing that's federally regulated. We talk about regenerative. We talk about sustainable measures. All of those things are already considered inorganic. We have to monitor our water usage.
Yep.
We have to monitor the environmental impacts, our neighboring, farms or fields. We have, these cute little burrowing owls in Yuma. I love them. That are endangered species. And so, how are we helping their habitats? And, things like that are already looked at inorganic that aren't looked at conventionally. And conventional farmers are picking up those habits. Like, integrated pest management, what we call IPM, is now pretty standard in pest control. I have pest control come to my house because we have ants and spiders, and I'll get mad and be like, can you just do something about these ants? And they're like, wow, here's the program we have to follow.
Right.
And it's like, IPM. But it's great because it's cost effective and it's actually practical. And so to see companies do this for everything, not just farming and not just organic, because we've realized it matters and it works. And the way I explain it to my kid is, this is how we farmed 100 years ago, before we had cheats. Like fertilizers and synthetics are all steroids in the food world that to make things faster and more, and we didn't need that. So this is going back to how we used to grow, and we're growing in harmony with Mother Nature.
Soil health is going to help you regardless of how you grow.
Yeah.
But whatever system you follow, if you can build more soil health, if you can build more carbon into your soil and more life, you're just going to have a better experience. And so it has been pretty amazing to watch the sort of technologies and practices sort of flow, across into the more conventional world. I think especially in some of the more intensively grown crops like produce and things is where I see it more. But it's great. I mean, that's wonderful. I mean, I'm a big fan of 5% better.
Right,
If
yeah.
you can do things 5% better, 5%, 5% less harm, that's something. And next year you do another 5%, and pretty soon you've changed the world.
It's a huge difference. Baby steps.
But it
Organics
takes
is baby steps.
probably takes a generation or two to really accomplish it. Podcast is recorded on the Cal Poly campus. Production provided by our production engineer, Mary Nascimento.